Hello again, my dear viewers. Since this worked out so well last time, I, Ravencrest, have decided to take recording duties away from Jackal for yet another episode until they learn how to not breathe into a microphone. I wouldn't place too many bets on this, however. With Big Bear Ben's focus on educating its guests about the lives of bears, it should come as no surprise that we would need to talk about salmon, as fish and bears go together like jam and Nutella. However, fish and Planet Zoo apparently go together like grape jelly and green beans, or so the Frontier has decided, so please forgive us if our fish look a little stiff and lifeless. I would like to give a huge thank you to Steam user Tom Osflug for their sample fishes blueprint, and remind our viewers that the salmon feature in this episode will only appear on Jackal's Steam Workshop page if they can be bothered to remember to upload it. They probably won't. As we begin the process of creating our lovely little enclosure for our salmon, keep in mind some fun facts about our fish. You see, salmon are one of the few fish capable of living in both freshwater and saltwater. This has to do with how each kind of water affects fish. Freshwater fish only need to filter out impurities and dust, but otherwise are able to stay hydrated by drinking the water and pulling oxygen from the water through their gills. However, saltwater causes problems because the salt increases the density of the water, and because the salt is constantly trying to pull the water out of the fish. To cope, most saltwater fish do not actually have certain bladders that freshwater fish do. They also have a different gill structure that allows them to pull as much oxygen out of the ocean as they can while filtering out the salt. Unlike freshwater and saltwater fish, salmon get around this by transitioning their gill structure. When they are born, their gills are accustomed to freshwater. However, as they travel downstream, they gradually change the structures to allow for saltwater survival. They memorize the smell of their home streams and rivers along the way while doing this. I use the term smell lightly, however, due to the fact that in reality, the chemical nature of the water inside of the ocean is how they find their compass toward home, but this is not truly necessary to know more about the salmon. Now, at the point where a river tends to open up into the ocean, it's an area of brackish water, which is a mixture of fresh and salt water. The salmon uses this to their advantage during their gill transformation, and then once they are ready, they will migrate out into the oceans where they will spend the vast majority of their lives. The salmon tend to travel far and wide throughout the entire Pacific Ocean. They may travel as far as Japan before returning home, though most tend to stay in the waters near Alaska. Eventually, once they've had their fill of the big wide ocean, they will return to their home stream to breed. Salmon complete this process by reversing the transition from saltwater gills to freshwater, and then using memorized smells to travel back up to their spawning point. Now, it is theorized that the reason salmon return to their home stream is because they know, for as close to a fact as is possible, that the conditions are right for their eggs. It does beg the question how new spawning grounds are formed, though, and Jackal suspects that it's a result of a pod getting lost along the way and trying to make do. After all, they are on a timer. Now, a single salmon can lay between 1,500 and as far upwards as 10,000 eggs in a spawning session. Of course, the vast majority of salmon do not actually survive to adulthood through a combination of bears, people, and other wildlife in the sea just consuming them. Salmon, as a species, is integral to all of Alaska, but currently I am only going to talk about their impact on Native American peoples and bears. You see, salmon is an integral food source to most Native Alaskans. The land is ill-suited to traditional farming methods, and so sustenance fishing makes up the backbone of most villages' protein sources. Native Alaskans have incorporated sustainable fishing practices into their hunting and cooking over many, many generations. This includes acquiring multiple species of salmon, such as the sockeye and coho. They are often kippered and stored in jars for long-term use. However, the pink, or humpy, salmon are best used for making a dish called fish loaf. The hump indicates a spawning male. However, eating the male salmon has significantly less effect on the breeding population than eating the females, as one male can impregnate several of the female type. Native Americans tend to live in harmony with the fish and the bears, such as the multiple species of bear that call Alaska home, the most famous being the grizzly bear. Sadly, we here at Big Bear Bend, due to Planet Zoo species not being specific, are only allowed to show one type of grizzly bear, but keep in mind that they are actually multiple types. Such types, in Alaska at least, can be shown either by the mainland species or the Kodiak subvariant, which reside on Kodiak Island in Alaska. We will be talking more about grizzlies next episode, so for now, I will move on to just general bear information. You see, bears patrol around water sources for food, as the area acts both as a place to catch fish and as a congregation spot for other prey animals, including deer, moose, sheep, and more. During spawning, the salmon will often jump out of the water in order to clear high currents or rocks. The bears take advantage of this time to catch them, but are generally just good at nabbing salmon whenever they can. You see, bears prefer salmon for the same reason we do. They are rich in protein, fat, oils, vitamins, and calories. As bears need about 6,000 calories a day or more in order to prepare for winter hibernation, they rely heavily on salmon spawning season to bulk up. This typically occurs around June or July, depending on the species of fish. Sadly, as time has gone on, we have led to a more problematic issue for salmon: our fishing industry. You see, salmon numbers have dropped to critical levels over the last decade due to overfishing. Salmon are most easily caught during the years they spend developing in lakes and rivers, or when out in the open ocean. However, ocean fishing practices have failed to meet our sustainability markers. There is no time frame, they just fail constantly. However, ocean fishing practices have failed to meet sustainability markers. And as the global human population continues to expand at an alarming rate, the vast majority of people rely on fish for some level of sustenance, and therefore the fishing industry has been pushed to meet ever higher demands, even while the fish populations of the world cannot sustain such growth. Sadly, the fishing industry actually does not discriminate between any fish, so salmon populations decline both for the capture of salmon as well as the capture of the foods that they eat as well, such as herring. And to combat this, humans have attempted to farm salmon, but this has been controversial. From an ecological standpoint, we are taking away critical water resources from other fish to care for one particular fish species, and they cannot be kept in pools. These must be on rivers, having a negative effect on everything else that relies on that water source. Sadly, it is also controversial from a consumer perspective, because fish often are far more expensive, and many say it doesn't taste as good when farmed. So, is salmon farming a more sustainable method of providing food than open ocean fishing? No. Sadly, they're both pretty bad. There's no nice way to put it. This isn't a really good way to move forward. Sadly, there's not much that we can do. The easiest answer is to self-select. The way to reduce demand for fishing is to stop eating fish. And there's no easier answer than that, sadly. But that answer assumes that you live in a place where other food sources are plentiful and sustainable, that you are able to get all the nutrition you need from alternative sources, and that you are willing to give up fish. I personally don't even like fish, and I like salmon, so I get that this is a hard ask. Sadly, it's an even harder ask because salmon are one of the best fish you can eat nutritionally. They're not caught solely to be put on the table. Fish are an incredible source of omega-3, a critical nutrient and popular vitamin supplement that is driven in popularity because the nutrient is lacking in other food sources at the quantity the human body needs. There is hope, however. You see, learning from native peoples who rely on these fish will give us insights into better fishing and farming practices. I know it's a cliche to say that we need to learn from the natives, but in this case, it's just a fact. They've been at it way longer than us, and they know what they're doing, and frankly, they care more. Never mind the inherent racism of dismissing their voices, which is absolutely a problem. We are just trying to straighten up the squandering knowledge that could benefit all people and our global ecosystem as a whole. Thank you again for watching this episode of Big Bear Bend. We hope it was enjoyable, and if you would like to hear this voice, feel free to give a like. Everything else is unnecessary, however, and I will repeat this once again. We don't actually care whether or not you like or subscribe. I simply enjoy doing what I do. Jackal enjoys doing what they do. And if you enjoy watching what we do, good for you. Have a wonderful and amazing day, night, or whatever bathroom break you're taking in order to watch this.
Little does he realize, I have a second microphone. Okay, so apparently there's only so much that you can say about salmon. I really tried to find enough salmon facts to fill an entire video, but like, it just wasn't enough, right? So instead, we're gonna go ahead and talk about what's going on like with the building process here, and then we're gonna talk a little bit about what we're gonna do for the rest of the zoo. So the building that we're doing right here, what I want to believe is that like when they purchased this land, like they purchased it from like, I don't know, some rich guy or whatever, and there was an old like fishing, wharf is too strong of a word, like a fishing cabin, you know, like something where like you would go out and you'd fish on the pier with your buddies or whatever, but it had been run down and dilapidated. And so when Big Bear Bend started to build up, they decided instead of bulldozing this building that they were going to turn it into something else. And so we're going to end up with our salmon museum here. So I wanted to do a specific focus on salmon because they're so integral to the entire ecosystem chain of the western United States and several other parts of the world. Like they're pretty critical for, I want to say Scandinavia as well. I didn't do a whole lot of research into the European varieties of salmon. I mostly focused on Alaska because our next animal is of course going to be the grizzly bear. And then of course we've got the polar bears that we just did. So there's sort of this emphasis on these western North American bears, and of course we don't have the black bear, which is a real shame. So with, you know, building up this like salmon museum and everything, my thought was, okay, well, let's try and focus on the 3 main Alaskan salmon, and then we'll bring in the Atlantic salmon because, you know, it's like the default one that you find when you Google things. So it's on there, it's on the board. We don't really talk about it, but you know, they're out there. And then the other 3 are like Alaskan specific. So we've got the sockeye, we've got the coho, and we've got the pink. It was very interesting trying to research these guys because they're mostly used for like, it's a combination of like recreational fishing and industrial fishing and subsistence farming. It's a very hard word for me to say. I don't know why. And subsistence farming is like huge up in Alaska. It's critical to the point where when we had the salmon in Alaska, like population crash this last couple of years, those were regulated to stay, but everything else was kind of stymied for at least a year. But, you know, so I wanted to focus specifically on these particular species because of where we're at. You know, I think this zoo is probably located somewhere in like western Montana. That's kind of the vibe I get. So of course those would be, you know, kind of the closest things, the most relatable. As far as the like, as I build the fish, and I ended up having to build my own fish. I didn't want to. But there were no blueprints on the workshop for anything like that. Like, there are fish blueprints, as we saw, you know, in the last series. They're like koi, and there's these really cute blueprints that I got off the workshop, but they're mostly made out of like leaves and like, you know, stuff like that to try and get the shape. They're very cool. Thank you to the guy who did that. They're really cute. I do end up implementing them here because they add like a nice little style, you know, a little color and a little pop that I think this area needed, because otherwise it's a very plain building, right? We've got these white plaster walls, we've got this wood, and the dark wood is going to be present throughout the entire zoo, right? That's sort of the resource that we have available to us. So adding in these extra little pops of color with these, you know, unique salmon that they've made. I think it looks, it adds a little bit of flavor. And of course, because we don't have actual fish in Planet Zoo, and we likely never will, it gives us something, a little bit more variety to work with. As far as the blueprints that I ended up making, I will try and get them onto the workshop, if you want them. I mean, I don't know how many people really need salmon for their zoos, and I don't know that they're necessarily proportional or anything like that. They're literally just for display. So this building right here, I've tried to build it with sort of an area where like you would go in and there'd be like these little mini aquariums, so you could see some fish that would be native to the river kind of swimming around, and you get to see some of the plants that live in the local river and things like that. And then you would be able to walk through and see, like salmon on the walls. They're not real salmon, but they're like, those like big marlin in those like a sports shop, if you've ever been to a Cabela's, that's kind of what I'm thinking here. They're not real, but they're accurate enough replicas that you get the idea. And then, have some facts, talk about the different species, what they're used for, basically like we did here in the video. So that was kind of the goal with the models and the aquariums, and then of course with the physical building. At a certain point I kind of gave up and I used all of those the like little environmental placards or whatever, because I think this is probably the best place for them. And usually they talk about things like climate change, which is of course very relevant, and then they've also got like bee populations and extinction, which we will get to bees when we get to the apiary and stuff. So this building was kind of difficult just because I'm not good at interiors in this game, and we don't really have the right parts for it. I would love like an interiors build pack, but I know that we're never going to get one of those, right? That's not their scope, that's not their focus, but we need it, it's important stuff. There's only so much that we can do with the build parts that we do have. So after all of that was built, I then went outside and added in all of the greenery and stuff like that, which originally I was just going to leave it plain. And then looking back on it, I was like, no, we need decoration. This looks terrible, and added in a little bit of a sign. So that's sort of what the building process was here. Of course, you'll see that throughout the rest of the video. In regards to like what we're going to do for the rest of the zoo, so I've already mentioned apiaries, and, sort of the limitations of what we can and can't do with a zoo. So my thinking is that, this is probably going to be the last of these, like, weird builds that we do for this series. I want to keep it very short, very clean. So we're probably going to have maybe 9-10 episodes in this entire series. We're going to, keep it real tight. It's not going to go on as long as, High Water Pass did, and I'm just not interested in doing that. I frankly have other things that I want to do with the channel, other projects that I'd like to be getting on to work on, and I like Big Bear Bend, but I'm dragging with it, So we are going to build things like apiaries, and there's going to be a place where you can walk through and you can see the different kinds of dens that bears would use in order to hibernate and have their cubs. And then I want to do like a little focus on like cave bears and like short-faced bears, because there's a lot of extinct variants that, of course we're never going to get in the game because, we're clearly not going to get a prehistoric pack. That's kind of what the Jurassic World series is for. But I think that it would be nice to focus on those because, of course, we've had a lot of extinct bears that have lived in North America and, across the world that have had various impacts on their local environment, and how bears have sort of shifted to fit those niches, or where none have ever been filled, especially with like cave bears and cave lions. Nothing really filled that niche afterwards. So that'll be a focus. And then as we move up the hill, as it is, we're going to get into more Asian theme, or Asian bears. So my first thought is, well, we need to lean in a little bit more to Asian architecture, to sort of show off where they're coming from, the differences. Problem with this, of course, is that we're assuming that this is not like a super rich zoo. Like, all of their money is being funded towards caring for these very large apex predators. So that's a lot of money that is not being able to go towards expansion and building and things like that. So what I've chosen to do is we're going to do those themed areas. So like when we get to the sun bear, there will be like a semi-Malaysian themed area. When we get to the panda, there will be a pagoda. But we're going to stick with what this zoo could reasonably acquire in terms of materials and what they could get done with manpower and things like that. So we're not going to recreate something that's accurate to what you would see in Malaysia. We're going to make something that is good enough, sort of that almost kind of theme parky kind of feel, just to give guests an idea of, okay, this is where things are, and give the illusion just enough that you're in the places where these bears live, without, importing a pagoda from Japan, So that's kind of the next direction that we're going to go in. And like I said, most of that will probably be off camera. So instead of building all of these things and then trying to fill space of like, okay, here's all the different dens that we have for different bears. Like that's maybe 2 minutes of talking, right? And then another 45 minutes of video if I'm not careful. No, I think not. So we're going to build all of that mostly off screen, or I'll build like a little, like I'll record it and then we'll do like a not a composition, but like a speed run almost of like, here's all the little bits and pieces. And then when the zoo actually goes up on the workshop, of course, you'll be able to visit it. And then when we do the final zoo tour, you'll actually have something to go look at, which, by the way, there is now a zoo tour available on the channel for High Water Pass if you're interested. It is a interactive zoo tour, so you watch through the first video and then you're given 2 choices, branching paths that you click through the next video and the next video and the next video. If you've played any of Markiplier's games, you know how this works. It's basically the exact same thing. We just did that for a zoo tour. And I would like to keep doing that because, quite frankly, I find zoo tours incredibly boring. But I know that that's just a me thing. That might not be the rest of the community. So those are sort of our points for what we're going to do with the zoo. As far as like, the rest of this episode, I really don't have a lot to say, unless you want to hear about my favorite salmon recipes, which you probably don't. I will say that baked salmon is probably the best. We might talk a little bit about kippered salmon, and we definitely talk about some of the dishes that are available that Native Alaskans makes out of salmon. There's fish cake or fish loaf. That's it, fish loaf, which is exactly what it sounds like. But then there's kippered salmon. And I ended up Googling it just for the sake of this episode. What is kippered salmon? Because it's delicious. It's my other favorite way to eat a salmon. It's just a form of smoking, It retains all of the moisture that you would hope that it has. But it's smoked salmon that is then jarred, and then you can eat it. And, of course, you'll probably be familiar with lox. Lox is basically the exact same concept, but kippered is a hot smoke, and, lox are a cold smoke. So it's 2 different processes to get not even similar results. They're different, but both are smoked fish. So, and there are plenty of other different, traditional Alaskan recipes. I'm not sure that there are recipes available, but you could always go check. So, anyway, that's basically all I can do to fill time. I hope that this wasn't terribly boring, and that nobody minds that Raven has taken over voicing for the channel. It just makes my life so much easier. It has been so difficult to find time where I actually have access to a microphone, and then I can talk, and then I can record, and then I can actually voice edit. It's been chaos over here. So, but we're trying to get back on a regular schedule. We're trying to get uploads to the point where it's Friday 2:30 every single week, and part of that is having Raven voice the channel. So I hope you all don't mind. I will jump in when I feel like jumping in,